This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Roger McEowen, K-State and Washburn law professor, starts off the show as he explains pesticide shield laws and what decision we will get in 2026. Continuing the show is Kansas Forest Service's fire prevention specialist, Shawna Hartman, as she discusses Kansas Wildfire Awareness Week and how people can help reduce wildfire risks. Part of a Beef Cattle Institute Cattle Chat podcast ends the show as Brad White, Bob Larson, Phillip Lancaster, Scott Fritz, and Liliana Rivas chat about leaky gut and what causes it. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Wednesday show with K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen discussing pesticide shield laws and litigation. Roger, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Shelby.
Roger, when it comes to pesticide litigation, what has been happening?
Well, I'll tell you, 2025 was really a big year for pesticide litigation. We had massive jury verdicts across the country, and then I think even a deepening divide over whether federal law shields manufacturers from state-level lawsuits. And, you know, at the heart of this is federal law. It's the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, Rodenticide Act, or FIFRA, and the question of federal preemption. And the basic question in all these cases is, does EPA approval of a label on a pesticide product prevent consumers from suing under state failure to warn laws? That's going to be the core issue. And really, the courts at the state level and the federal level are split on this. And the battleground state, of course, on pesticide litigation is the state of Missouri, just because of where some of the major companies are headquartered, happens to be in Missouri. But the Missouri State Supreme Court in recent years has reviewed two major cases. They upheld a $611 million judgment in one case and a $1.25 million award in another case. And they said that state warning requirements are consistent with and not different from federal standards, meaning EPA approval does not grant manufacturers blanket immunity. And that litigation really, Shelby, has gone nationwide. We've seen it in Georgia, in Pennsylvania, in the state of Washington. Particularly in Washington, the cases began flowing back from California's national multi-district litigation to the state courts in Washington state, which opens up a new front in the MDL litigation for the Pacific Northwest. And a lot of this has come from the Roundup litigation. It's just seemingly endless that Bayer, which is the successor of Monsanto, has had to deal with.
And what case has made it all the way to the Supreme Court now?
Well, that's a good question. We do have one that's before the Supreme Court. It's that $1.25 million award in a case out of Missouri. It's Durnell against Monsanto. And that case was from the Missouri Court of Appeals. It worked its way through the court system. And the Durnell case is now at the U.S. Supreme Court. They decided that they would hear the case on the 16th of January. They put it on a fast track, so we will get an opinion this term, which means by the end of June. So we'll see what happens on that one, but that's the one to watch on this issue. Last time the Supreme Court has spoken on this was known as the Bates decision. That was in 2005. So it's been 21 years, and we'll get hopefully a further clarification of the reach of Bates, and maybe this will settle down some of the state litigation too.
And is there another standard when we're thinking about Kansas that is kind of creating a clash?
Well, there's been there's been legislation in numerous states in response to these huge jury verdicts. And so in 2025, you could even go back to 2024 in Iowa, but in 2025 in particular, there was a coordinated push for state-level shield laws, and I call them shield laws. That's commonly what they're known as, to protect the ag industry from litigation. North Dakota became the first state to say that an EPA-approved label satisfies all state duty to warn requirements. Georgia passed a law limiting liability if the label is consistent with EPA health assessments. Iowa in 2024 and 2025, the attempts to provide a blanket immunity for pesticide manufacturers failed. It stalled both times. And so those legislative actions represent a tension, I think, between protecting consumer rights to seek damages and ensuring national uniformity in chemical labeling.
And do we see a lot of consistency when we look at shield laws throughout the states?
There is some. In fact, Kansas has a bill that has actually passed the Kansas House. It's before the Kansas Senate right now. And that's often referred to, again, as a pesticide shield law. And I understand, and I think it's pretty clear to everybody that manufacturers are rightfully looking for a way out of a rock and a hard place, so to speak, created by this massive multi-district litigation. The current trajectory of the bill does raise some serious policy concerns for Kansas consumers and the integrity of the judicial system. But at its core, it's an attempt to take Kansas to the pre-2005 legal standard. Again, the Supreme Court spoke on this issue in the Bates case in 2005. And it's seeking to insulate chemical manufacturers from the type of litigation that's been successful, specifically regarding products like Roundup or glyphosate and paraquat. And so we did have a previous Supreme Court case in Kansas that's known as the Jenkins case. That was decided in 1994, but that was before the Supreme Court issued its opinion in Bates. And so essentially what the Jenkins court said in 94 in Kansas was that if the EPA approved the label, then the manufacturer's golden. They're protected. But then the Supreme Court came down in Bates and they said, no, there's no such thing as a blanket shield. And they said if state law claims are brought, those are only preempted if they impose requirements in addition to or different from the federal label under FIFRA. So if the product is misbranded, meaning the label is inadequate even by the EPA standards, then the Supreme Court, the Bates decision, allows the lawsuit to move forward. Well, what Kansas is trying to do is close that so-called Bates loophole by declaring that an EPA-approved label is sufficient as a matter of Kansas law, regardless of whether the plaintiff could prove the product is technically misbranded or that the manufacturer withheld data from the EPA. Now, it since has been amended. I'm not convinced the amendment deals sufficiently with the issue, but I do think there's a path forward to protect consumers and protect the chemical industry at the same time.
For all these factors, then, when we look at pesticide shield laws and the litigation, what are some of your concerns?
Well, I think the primary concern here is, and this is broader than just pesticide litigation, and this has to do with any type of product. We don't want manufacturers to make defective products. And if defective products are made, the legal system should hold any company responsible for making a defective product that results in injury. The problem that you've got with the pesticide issue is that the pesticide itself is usually what's defective in these situations. And so that's different than the usage of a product outside the pesticide realm. So what we've got here is some language in the amended bill that seems to still invite judges to dismiss design claims that are disguised as failure to warn claims. And in Kansas, I think there's a way to remedy that. And one, the label should be evidence of compliance, not a total shield. So we don't want to take these cases away from juries, but yet we don't want bad lawsuits being brought forth that companies have to defend. So how do we do this? Well, instead of saying that the label is prima facie evidence of compliance, in other words, you can't sue us because we've got the federal government that's blessed the label. Even the Supreme Court in 2005 didn't say that. It should be mere evidence. It should not be a total bar, not a total shield. And then what they could do in the legislation is this explicitly state that nothing in the bill limits claims for strict liability, design defects, or manufacturing defects, and then allow claims if the manufacturer fails to disclose known health risks to the EPA. That's an easy one. I think they will do that. I think the bill will get further amended. And then just basically codify what the U.S. Supreme Court said in 2005. Or the other thing they could do, and frankly, I think this is probably the preferred approach, let's just wait to see what the U.S. Supreme Court says in the case that's pending before it, and then model legislation after whatever the court says. That would be the cleanest thing to do. But Shelby, you and I both know legislatures don't tend to do the cleanest thing every time.
How could this impact Kansas producers with what the U.S. Supreme Court decides?
Well, That's really where the rubber meets the road in this situation. The ag industry undeniably needs protection from predatory or inconsistent litigation. And the conclusive presumption model that's being pushed in a lot of state houses, I think, creates a dangerous precedent. So if an administrative agency becomes what I would call an impenetrable legal shield, the right to the jury of one's peers is taken away. And that doesn't just affect pesticide users, it creates a blueprint for other industries to lobby for immunity based on federal agency sign-offs. And that potentially erodes product safety concerns across the board. So for our Kansas consumers, our Kansas farmers and ranchers, we want access to these chemicals. We want a way where the companies can provide the chemicals without undue fear of litigation over them, but yet we want to protect the consumers. That's really the tough spot, the tough policy choice that legislators have to make. But that's why they're legislators. They make those tough policy choices. But we'll see what the Supreme Court says on this. And they, again, as I said, they fast-tracked it. So we'll have the decision by the end of June this year. And hopefully that finds a way where we can protect agriculture and protect consumers at the same time. Those aren't mutually exclusive goals. And I think we can find a place that satisfies everybody eventually.
Roger, what's your recommendation for people who would like to read more on this?
This is posted to my blog. It's also up on Ag Manager for K-State. I share my blog articles with Ag Manager, so that's the place they can go to find it.
Roger, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Shelby. Appreciate it.
That was K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. I will link his blog article titled Pesticide Shield Laws in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show discussing Kansas Wildfire Awareness Week with fire prevention specialist with the Kansas Forest Service, Shawna Hartman. Shawna, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Shelby, for having me.
Shawna, as February 8th through the 14th is Kansas Wildfire Awareness Week, is there a theme that goes along with it this year?
Yes, this year's theme is working together for wildfire awareness and making Kansas stronger. And really what that is, it's just highlighting how wildfire preparedness and prevention starts at home and extends to neighbors and local fire departments and our state and federal partners.
Is there a group of partners that are coming together on this campaign to share this message?
Yes, we do. We have a great group of partners with us, and it is, of course, includes the Kansas Forest Service and then the Kansas Division of Emergency Management, the Office of the State Fire Marshal, the Kansas State Firefighters Association, the Kansas Association of Fire Chiefs, and then our federal partners as well, the National Weather Service, the U.S. Forest Service through the Cimarron Grasslands. And we also have another state partner that's helping us out this week, and that's KDOT.
When we're talking about wildfires, what is the common cause of wildfires in Kansas?
Well, over 90% of our wildfires are caused by human activity. And so there's a long list of things that we do. Most of them are accident. Very few are malicious in nature. Like people aren't meaning to start their wildfires. Most of it is intentional burning. And by intentional, I mean people set out to burn something, but to keep it in a specific place. And it just got out of that specific place and ended up causing a wildfire. Right now, we've had lots and lots of people that are taking advantage of the snow-covered ground and have been burning their brush piles. However, when that snow melts and the grass dries out, that's a 1 hour fuel, we call it, and that grass dries out quickly. If those brush piles weren't completely extinguished, embers have been getting into that grass that's not that's dried out and has been causing wildfires across the state. And we've seen that happen the last few days, even last week when the snow was just melting. And that causes a couple problems for our responders. One is the fields are still wet. So then our trucks are getting stuck in responding. And also people aren't noticing those brush piles because they've been smoking for 2 or 3 days. So the smoke is normal and they're not calling them in because they don't see them as a threat. And so those are some things, and some tips for brush pile burning is, if you make sure that you're around your brush pile, there's bare mineral soil as wide as the pile is tall. Then you can make a brush pile within a dirt area. It won't creep out into that grass quite as bad. And then stir up those piles. Take a bucket from a truck if it's a big pile, or a shovel or a rake, and stir up those piles and make them flat. And even walk, if you think they're completely out, walk out into that brush pile, put your hand down there, make sure there's no heat coming from that brush pile.
And beyond brush piles, when we're thinking about our rural and agricultural communities, are there any other common causes you see of people accidentally starting fires?
Yeah, our equipment in fields, a lot of times the bearings get hot. There's other things that happen with machinery that catch on fire in our fields. And most of our farmers and ranchers have their fire extinguishers right there with them. They know the causes of these, and this is a good plan to plan for those kind of accidents. Welding is another one that on a hot, windy day, we need to fix fence and gates, and we weld, and it's good to, around your welding spot, to have down to bare mineral soil where there's not a lot of vegetation around where you're welding. All it takes on some of these windy, warm days, when we've had more warm days than what's normal, and they're windy and not a lot of moisture in the vegetation, it just takes one spark. Really, it's the same with intentional burning as far as pasture burning as well. If you're planning on burning in either March or April coming up, we really want you to start thinking about planning that even in the fall. And if you haven't, plan it now. Go get those fire breaks put in and get your burn plan written and understand what your goal is for that fire.
And Shawna, this theme, as we mentioned, working together for wildfire awareness, making Kansas stronger, and what groups of people do you have, or Kansas Forest Service is recognizing for working together?
Yeah, it starts with everybody, but really our homeowners are the first group that we focused on this week. And being prepared for fire really, really starts at home. Kansas is a fire adapted ecosystem. We talk about that a lot. We're going to have fires. Some of them are going to get away from us, or there's going to be accidents, and we're going to have wildfires. So just preparing for those, just some things that you can do. We focus things that you can do at home to be prepared. And then to prevent those fires, making sure that you look at the weather report and you're not barbecuing or burning your leaves or anything when there's a high fire danger. And then responding, knowing what to do when the fire is coming towards you, is a good thing for homeowners to know and to remember. Kansas is a wildfire state. A lot of our neighbors in Kansas don't realize that Kansas is a wildfire state. We're routinely in the top 5 annually for the number of fires and the acres that are burned nationally. So you think of California and Colorado and Washington and Oregon and those places, Kansas is right up there with them, with the amount of fires we have and the acres that we burn. We just have really great responders that take care of them, and we don't hear about them as much in the news, but they're there.
Is it also important to maybe communicate with neighbors?
So the next group of folks that we talk about is neighbors helping neighbors. And, our homesteads just a lot of times butt up right next to our neighbors, whether we're in a community or we're out in rural areas, we all have neighbors. And we want to make sure that we're being a a good neighbor and keeping our property where it's fire resilient. And we want to, extend that to our neighbors too and help them. And fuel reduction is a huge thing, whether we're doing it mechanically or we're using prescribed burning. And one thing that we find a lot is somebody is burning their pasture and it gets off onto their neighbors, and the fire department comes out and they realize that the neighbor was going to burn that pasture anyway. And so banding together with your neighbors and reducing that vegetation and that fuel together with your neighbors is a great way to reduce the risk, really, of using that tool of fire. And then, also neighbors helping neighbors through prescribed burn associations. That's where you can come together with neighbors, use each other's tools and the manpower, and reduce that vegetation and make our landscape more resilient and healthy together.
And if we're talking about fires, it's really important that we also mention our fire departments, and how can we make sure that we're giving them the resources to be able to respond quickly if something does happen?
Yeah, we want to make sure that you know who's going to respond to your fires, how they're going to respond, and make sure that your address is well displayed. And if you have a water source or any of those things, equipment that can help the fire department come, it's really important to have that plan in place even before the fire starts.
And as we're looking at this Wildfire Awareness Week in Kansas, important to mention just the partnerships overall and what that means for fire safety.
It does. We really work well with our partners across the state, from the local level through the state and then also the federal level. And just knowing what partnerships those are and what they can bring to the table is really important, not just for us at a state level, but also for the homeowners and community leaders and county leaders and state and federal agencies. Just like we think about our weather service, they play a large part in helping us prepare for those days that the weather is going to be significant for fire weather, and bringing together our emergency response agencies and that level of expertise that we have all the way through, from local all the way to our federal partners, is important.
If people want to find out more information about this Kansas Wildfire Awareness Week, how can they do that?
Visit the kansasforest.org. Right there on the homepage, there's a link that'll take you to a page that goes through the campaign and has links that will direct you to what to do around your home, all of our partners' links, and how you could find resources for everything we've talked about today.
That was Fire Prevention Specialist with the Kansas Forest Service, Shawna Hartman. I will link the resource that she mentioned in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Wednesday show with part of the Beef Cattle Institute's Cattle Chat podcast.
Leaky gut is something that we've had a lot of questions about in the last few years. What is leaky gut? What's the technical name? What's going on? What's the process?
So those are all great questions that I don't know that we have a solid answer to. The technical name is gastrointestinal permeability. And so what we think is happening based on some of the markers and stuff that we use is that the paracellular transport, so molecules going between cells in the GI tract, increases for whatever reason. So basically the tight junctions between cells that keep stuff out that's not supposed to get into the bloodstream are weakened, and that allows molecules and even bacteria to cross into the bloodstream. And then we end up with, inflammation and other things. And I don't think we really know what the consequences of that is to a good degree.
I mean, it's interesting. This is not a topic I was taught in veterinary school. I don't remember reading any papers until relatively recently. So I don't know if the guts didn't used to leak and now they do, or we've kind of gotten some evidence that there's some things going on in the intestinal tract that might affect whole body health. And so it is an interesting position between nutrition and veterinary medicine that, again, we've known all along that nutrition and veterinary medicine have a lot of overlaps, but this is a really tight connection between the two.
Yeah, because some of the things that we do know that appear to cause it are nutrition related, like feed restriction, maybe high amounts of starch, things that disrupt the microbiome in the intestine, lead to increased permeability. But we don't have a good handle on how often it happens, the different things that cause it. We know heat stress seems to cause it. Some dietary changes and things seem to cause it or increase it. I'm not sure if it's not even there at a basal level, lots of the time. There's just so many unknowns right now about this leaky gut phenomenon that we don't have a good way to understand it or to prevent it.
So, Scott, if we had increased gastric permeability and we're letting bacteria come across or we're letting other things come across, what's the consequences of that, or what are the potential things that you could see which would be a problem for the animal?
First thing that comes to mind, you shower the bloodstream with bacteria is probably not good. And that's the first thing where I would stop. But then you worry, from my perspective, you worry about some of the other like metal type things that we have fairly regulated uptake for could be disrupted and could be disrupting some of the trace mineral supplementation, and even I'm wondering about feed grade antibiotics and some of those things. Do they have, if the permeability changes, are our dosing things that we use not applicable in all situations?
And I think any of those could be potential problems. What is the gold standard for diagnosing this, Phillip?
I don't know that we have one. In the studies that I've read, I've seen them use indigestible sugars, and that's been used in humans quite a bit. But then some studies have used like chromium, which is a metal element, that's a mineral. Those are the main things that I've seen used.
So basically what you're saying is, so you feed them something that shouldn't cross over into the bloodstream, and then you measure the blood and see, does it show up?
Yeah,
and
so
if it shows up, you go, there's leaky gut.
So they've done a couple different ways, taking blood samples to see if you measure it in the blood, and then they've also done like urine collections, and then see if it's
got all the way
in the urine. Yes.
So, Liliana, what did you do in your project?
So we actually used 2 different indigestible sugars to test this, and we took blood at multiple time points throughout 36 hours. And then we analyzed the samples for sugar serum concentration.
So basically, just as they were describing, you gave an indigestible sugar that should not be found in the bloodstream. It should just pass through the GI tract and pass out. But if you find it in the blood, you might have leaky gut. And did you do this on just any calves that didn't have leaky gut, or did you induce leaky gut in some way?
So we actually induced leaky gut, and as Dr. Lancaster previously mentioned, we did this by feed restriction. We restricted their feed by quite a bit and pretty much almost assumed that would induce leaky gut from previous studies.
Once again, that was part of BCI's Cattle Chat podcast. You can hear their full episode by following the link in today's show notes on agtoday.net. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.